to Fresh Take.
You are listening to the Fresh Take Network.
You're listening to the Fresh Take Network.
What it is, what it do. Welcome to Fresh Take. Joshua Adam William Arbuthot with Mr. Andy Kenyar. Andy, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing, man? Long time since we've done one of these, so it's good to catch up.
Yeah, I don't know how to introduce this movie anymore. Do I call it the New Avengers? Do I call it Thunderbolts? I don't know what to call this movie anymore now.
Well, it's still Thunderbolts to me, so...
Yeah, all the marketing as we record today. I mean, it's kind of I was going to try to do this on Friday after we saw it on the Thursday, but obviously, you know, life gets in the way, stay busy and whatnot. Today we wake up to new marketing for it, and all the marketing is New Avengers. Billboards changed, advertising changed, websites changed. It is now called the New Avengers. This is after obviously they did something at the opening day, the press showing that they had shot something. So it seemed to have always been a plan. I just wonder if it was a plan this fast, and with the news of it having less of a box office than Brave New World, I do wonder if this was the adjustment to do it sooner, because they don't really have any competition until the end of the month with Lilo and Stitch and Mission Impossible, that they figured, hey, let's put the Avengers scene out there. Maybe that will pique interest.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think to me it almost takes a little bit away from the movie. This just feels like a strange, like you said, it's something that feels like maybe did this just happen because it didn't have the opening? Like if this has a $150 million opening weekend, does this not happen? Do you just run with the Thunderbolts as it is? So, and you know, if the hard part is you know, you see the last post-credit sequence. You know, you see what happens in Brave New World with Falcon, Captain America, whoever, being asked to put together a new Avengers team. You know, it's like it kind of almost goes. It's not even sort of a for sure thing. It doesn't even feel like it's canon in the movie.
Yeah. So where do you want to start with everything here?
Just, I don't know, to start at the beginning. Like, you know, what were your initial thoughts of the film, and you know, like what, you know, I don't want to get into the is Marvel back conversation quite yet.
No.
But you know,
I think it's such a stupid conversation, because if you really look at the project since Endgame, we've had more projects that we've said is Marvel back than not, right? Mm-hmm. But it's those lower projects, the secret invasions of the world and whatnot, that make people like, oh, the MCU is dead. The Quantumanias. There is much less Quantumanias and secret invasions than not. There is much better. There's much more good things than there is bad things. So this whole obstructive is the MCU back conversation is pretty annoying to me.
Right.
If anything, that there. And the other thing is too, I think it's everyone trying to level it to where Endgame is, right? Or for some people where No Way Home was, right? If you label it to those type of films with all these cameos and all this nostalgia, of course you're going to be let down. I think that's what happened to Multiverse of Madness. And when you levy that expectation down to Multiverse of Madness, it's actually a pretty good film. But the expectations had been so escalated because of what we had seen in Endgame and what we saw in No Way Home, that you were expecting cameo. And Marvel itself did fall into that rabbit hole itself. So then we come to Thunderbolts, and I think the one thing I was looking for was better narrative storytelling, better character storytelling. And to have that levy of theories, I think that's where the MCU was at its best, was theories, right? You walk out of a movie and say, oh, well, they teased this at the end of this, so now this leads to this. And this happened in the movie. Now this leads to this because I read it in the comic. That, to me, is what you mean when you talk about is the MCU back. That's a long one to talk right there, but
no, man, I love that answer, and I think you're totally right. Like, you know, I think when you get to do some of the theory work on stuff, but like you can see the path that Marvel is going on, I do agree that that's when the MCU was at its best, when it just leaves it open to like every, blog YouTuber under the sun who wants to review a movie and is like, if it's not like crazy action and I didn't see like 5 of my former favorite people in the film, it's absolute garbage. It's like, do you even care if it's a well-constructed movie? Because that clearly doesn't seem to be what you're looking for. I was trying to think of, I think you and I got into the conversation immediately, like, where does this stand in terms of movies post Endgame? And what I tried to do was say, like, well, where would this be if I was putting it in the movies before Endgame? Like, where would I rank it within that? Like, what would its contemporaries be? And I came on to things like, the original Doctor Strange, maybe original Guardians. Like, these were really good movies, that kind of pulled together, maybe not. And, the funny thing is if you go back and you think about what the original Avengers team was, the comic book world thought that was a B-list group of characters. Like, this was not the best versions of what Marvel had to offer. And now, to me, it's like they've gone back to a bit of a B-list group of characters, but it's allowed them to actually make a really good movie. Because you're not sitting there thinking, well, why isn't Andrew and Toby in this? Well, why don't I have 1,500, cameos in that next Deadpool movie? Like, you're taking away some of that. So it's like, well, what is this movie? How does it stack up to what the original, phases of the MCU were? And that's kind of where I settled. I was like, this is in that Doctor Strange, Daredevil, maybe original Thor. Do I think it's Captain America, Winter Soldier? Is it, original first Black Panther? Is it, Civil War? No, I don't think it's at that level. But I also think that it's a really good film. Like, it's a really well told story. One of the things that I heard commented on was, just the visuals of the story itself. And I didn't even think of it until I heard it, was it actually almost has a bit of a Christopher Nolan feel with kind of how it depicts New York.
The Inception kind of thing too, with the void as well.
Yeah, and I was like, that's a pretty unique thing to bring into the MCU because it's something that hasn't been done. That was kind of one of the things that I really liked. We were there, we watched the movie together, and there's the scene where Red Guardian saves that little girl from getting crushed, and she's the first one who gets like sucked into the void, and you were like, ah! Like, there was an out loud like, holy crap. And that was, that's the type of stuff that you want to have. Like, is it visually, compelling enough to actually draw some emotion out of you, with that visual storytelling. And I think this movie did a really, really good job. And so that's why, to me, like the comparison to a Christopher Nolan type film is actually pretty accurate.
Well, and I brought up the theme too. It was a more mature version of Inside Out, right? And there's 2 scenes, and I guess we'll just go to this early on now because this was an overlying theme that stuck out to you and I. In Inside Out, the scene with anxiety going to all the levels of the machine, as someone that struggles with OCD and anxiety and depression at times, that scene really stuck out to me personally. But in this one, you had a really, really great scene that took it to another level and kind of had it to a more mature level of the audience, right? With the depiction of the void and the depiction of those, dark memories and how you repress them, and even having Elena talk about, just repression, just put it deep down in your side, which obviously any therapist,
that's what you do, right?
Yeah, any therapist worth their money would tell you, please don't do that. I would not advise that.
Yep.
So yeah, I thought they did a very good job of having that as an losing the track of the words right here, but a
like
theme
an overarching
without,
view.
Thank you. There it is. An overarching theme throughout the film was this idea of having that, self-loathing, that depression, how it weighs on you. I think one of the big pinnacles is when Yelena just opens up to Red Guardian and just says, "I'm so lonely, Dad," in a real way, which one of the extras decided to get a little bit extra themselves when they walked by. Which I'm not the only podcast that said that, but that extra definitely, I'm sure people by now have that actor's name, but she definitely made a name for herself, being a little bit extra there.
She's getting more than extra work coming up.
But that scene really stuck out. And then obviously with everything with Bob facing off against the Void.
Yeah, I mean, I guess where I want to start with this conversation is, there's a lot of criticism online right now where it's like, that this doesn't belong in a comic book movie, that this type of message doesn't belong. And, I guess in my mind, I'm like, it doesn't belong if you're not going to do it well. If you're going to, do it in a way that is either not accurate or, just kind of paints it in a very nonchalant manner. You've kind of seen a lot of the reviewers and stuff like that have, they just make light of it, well, the people are just dealing with a little bit of depression, or people were upset, or, whatever. And I'm like, this is not what these people are talking about. These people are talking about true mental health challenges. You and I, we certainly have talked on numerous podcasts about kind of where we come from. I deal with bipolar, and, there was elements of this that, were very, very accurate to what those dark moments really look like. And, I guess, do you like the idea that a villain is defeated by a hug? I mean, I guess if you phrase it that way, no, it probably doesn't have the most appeal. But what it does show is that people can be in a very dark, violent, negative place. And really, in order to kind of get them out of that, what people really need to feel is supported. And that's what, did they win by the hug? No, they won by showing him that him leading into the void and, sitting there when he's punching the void over and over and over again, that's not a way that you can defeat those demons in your life. You can't beat that into submission. What you need to feel is that you have people that you can turn to. I've done podcasts where I've talked about, my challenges and the different events that happened over my life. I've done public speaking for men's groups and stuff like that as well. And, the reality is most people would never think that certain people have these problems. And the reason is because those of us who have them, and you can probably speak to it as well, you get really good at hiding it, or at the very least, keeping yourself out of situations where if you are hiding it, you're not going to put yourself in a situation where somebody can watch you hide it. And when you see Yelena go into the room and she's seeing that, that repeat of that scene where, she's calling out her young friend so that she can be shot by somebody else. And you see that being done on the repeat cycle. And, sort of, I've always talked to my therapist and my counselors is saying, to me, it's the hamster wheel. You kind of go around and around and around, and one thought leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. And it's really hard to get out of that. And what I saw in that movie was a very, very adult, very, very visually compelling demonstration of what that actually looks like to somebody who's in the middle of it. And the one thing that I would say for people who are like, this doesn't belong in my comic book movie, I've spoken in front of groups of guys, you and I know each other, and, I've played university volleyball and basketball and Team Canada basketball, volleyball and stuff like that. Like I've played sports at a fairly high level, and you can talk to other people, guys who have, done a lot of those types of things. And you would be surprised at how many of them, if given the opportunity to feel that it's safe to talk about it, are the first ones to say, holy shit, I deal with that exact same stuff. And to have that in a comic book movie where you don't know what your audience is going to see, and you don't know what they're like and what they have going on in their life. And if you do it in a mature, grown-up, well-visualized manner, it's going to have an impact on people, and it's a positive impact. And I'm sorry if you're only watching comic book movies to see stuff blow up and to see cameos from characters that existed in a movie 10 years ago, okay, maybe this isn't for you, but please understand that there are probably a lot more people than you want to admit that actually are going to really relate to what this content is about.
Again, too, I feel like whenever anyone has these conversations, I don't want this blank in my comic book movie or action movie, specifically on the comic side. Let's just say it's like, well, then you didn't read comics then, because these themes have been part of comics forever, where you go to the X-Men, or you go to early 70s comics with Arrow's I believe it was Green Arrow's Ward shooting up heroin and having a conversation on the drug crisis of the 1970s. And I could go on and on and on. Yeah, Demon in a Bottle. There has been these deep-seated issues confronted in comics for years and years and years, in some ways more applicable and better represented in those pages of a comic or a novel, graphic novel, whatever you want to call it, than there had been in film or television at times, the way that it was tackled. And now, because of the popularity of these stories and the burst of what we're seeing from the MCU and DC and Invincible and The Boys and whatnot, we're getting to have those stories in another way, right? I mean, if you kind of look at this season of Invincible, to a degree, you're seeing a lot of Mark was struggling with identity and who he is and who he should be and letting loose. And that kind of comes back down to when people here say, oh, well, they won by the power of friendship. No, because if you go back and you fall, and you can say maybe, I don't know, but you look back at Yelena telling her dad herself, I'm so lonely. And in that moment, she bonds with Bob because realizes that Bob has had a tough life. And that's why when he takes the serum, it has brought out the void in him, because he's had a rough life, and we've seen that life. And she knows in that moment, all he needs is support. That's all he needs.
Well, and where does he win her? Where does she really win him over? When they're coming out and she just says, get behind me, I'll protect you. Like, this is probably a feeling that this guy has never felt in his life. You see it in his vision with his parents, how his mom blames him for things, his dad blames him for things. Like, he has probably never had somebody say, don't worry, I got your back, stay behind me, I'm going to take care of you. Yeah. And that's a powerful, powerful thing to people. And you're 100% right. And if you want to look back and somebody who says this is not part of my comics, you only have to look at who Jack Kirby and Stan Lee were. They were two Jewish guys who were writing stories about how hard that was to be in New York. Like, a lot of the characters in these things, The Thing is a prime example, right? Like, this was Stan Lee's vision of himself. He felt he wasn't a good looking guy. He lived on Yonkers Street. He was very Jewish. And, people just didn't relate to what he was doing. This is what your comics are. I am sorry. If you actually don't think that, you don't understand comics. If you love the X-Men are about people who don't fit into the world. And the people who feel that way. And you don't have to have crazy superpowers. You can look different. You can feel different. You can feel like, the people that you want to, the groups of friends that you want to be a part of, you just don't fit. And I don't care who you are, that shit can be challenging. You and I have talked about it, right? When we were younger, we lived in the side where we were jocks, we were athletes, but we were nerds as well. And that time, I'm 50 years old now. Back then, those two worlds didn't coexist very well. So you chose one. You chose which one were you going to show to different people, because that was how you could feel that you could fit into things. So again, like, anybody who says, well, this isn't my Marvel, this isn't my comic book story, I'm sorry, man, you have missed the point of what comic book stories are and why people like us think comic book stories are, the modern mythology of our universe, and they tell stories that will stand the test of time because this is what they talk about. Yeah. And you don't want those stories to be immature or, like, I saw a podcast with, somebody who has a fairly good history of shitting all over Marvel for, saying that it's too female based or whatever. And his comment was, this didn't talk about mental health in a way that was respectful to an 8-year-old. And I was like, my thought to that is, asshole, you don't know what mental health looks like. And you shouldn't be throwing out comments like that, because it's insulting to people like me who are athletes and are nerds and do live with this shit and have a very successful life, but we live with these challenges. And I am telling you, you saw it on my face in that movie. There was a point where I was like, big deep breaths, and I'm like, okay, this is all like sitting so close to home that, you know, it's difficult for me to sit and just absorb, because it is very real to what those scenarios look like when you are alone and you are just hoping that just somebody is going to throw you a lifeline and get you off the freaking hamster wheel.
Yeah, I mean, in that experience too, you know, being next to you, I could tell that this was obviously hitting close to home for you. There was points that were hitting close to home for me, and there was points when I was very close. I could tell you were okay, but where I was going to reach over and even to you, be like, "Hey, it's okay, we're all good." Much like what you saw from that scene there with the Void, because this is a situation that people deal with, and that it was an overarching feeling from the entire. And you kind of look at. I was thinking of Guardians. In some way, Guardians hit in some of these themes, but not as deep as what this did. Right? Of like, you have someone in Drax who is grieving and lost his wife and lost his child. You have someone like Star-Lord that lost his mother, and he's trying to find a way and get stuck with the Ravengers. Gamora, that's a can of worms that we don't need to open, but there's a lot of stuff going on there. And then with Rocket, we kind of know there's a lot of stuff with Rocket there, and they come together and form this bond. It's a story as old as time, especially in the MCU, when you build this group of people that have issues and come together and build a family bond and build a friendship bond. The difference with this and Thunderbolts is there is a lot more of sharing those feelings and then kind of coming together and realizing that they're all not alone. And that's what concludes in that big hug there. And again, to a way with Guardians, when they all hold the Power Stone there, I believe it's the Power Stone, at the end.
Yeah, and it's the one part that I actually really related to as well was but when they all kind of start to go into they're in the Void and Bucky's there, and everybody says, "Is everybody all right?" And Bucky says, "Yeah, I got nothing that terrible in my past. I'm fine." And it's like that's how I relate. Like, I relate to a lot of stuff that way, by making light of it, by making jokes of it, because sometimes you're like, this is the only way that I can like not just sit and dwell and focus on. I mean, you and I talked about it. We're like, what would those Void rooms of Vision rooms look like for Bucky, for Frank Castle, for
Frank Castle,
for Peter Parker, for Kingpin, for Daredevil? Like, there are people in that New York lifestyle for Jessica Jones. Like, there's stuff that have happened in those people's lives that I am sure they want no part of watching happen over and over and over again, because they're already doing that. They're already having those visions in their own mind. Man, you don't need it in some sort of like psychic death movie theater of your mind. Like, this is not what you're looking for. So how do you cope with it? You make jokes. And like Bucky just was like right on the money, because I'm like, that's something that I would say. Yeah, my life is so freaking fantastic. There's nothing to look at over here.
Yeah. So I think they did such a good, and for Marvel to tackle it too, right? To have a superhero movie and attach, depression and bipolar and anxiety to it. I thought they did a tremendous job of attaching that and having that as the overarching theme to it, and doing a really good job with having that. And that's, a lot of these Marvel movies used to have like a deeper theme to them, right? They didn't just be like, here's a superhero movie and whatever. But especially the comics, man, especially in the comics, they all had a lot of this very real underarching story. So again, you're going to sit there and say, this shouldn't be in my comic book movie or my Marvel movie, then you haven't actually read any Marvel comics. No. Let's talk about some other parts of the movie that, like as we said, the mental health part was a big aspect of it. Let's talk about the Sentry himself, though. Obviously, this is a character that was long overdue for a live action adaptation. As someone that's read a lot of the Century stuff, what was your thought on Century and then the Void itself?
I mean, he is such a cool character because he is, the overpowered of overpowered characters. This is a character who in the comic books basically fights World Breaker Hulk to a standstill. This is a character who tears Ares, the god of war, in half. He fights Thor to a standstill, when he has Mjolnir and that, and you're like, this is a character who is on par with anybody else. The closest thing to something bad happening to him is just recently in the comics, he's killed by Null. And that's the closest thing to anything bad happening to him. And it's because Null keeps the Void down. He doesn't allow that version of Robert Reynolds to come to the surface. And, everybody, I think, in these comic movies, we talk about it when it was like, are you doing Scarlet Witch the right way? Are you showing how powerful she is? You saw it in that Illuminati scene, but you're like, how does Marvel navigate that? Because you can't have those characters unless you have somebody to be able to offset their powers. And, but you want to see it like when you saw that scene with the Illuminati, you're like, this is how these types of fights should go. One just kicks the crap out of the other with very minimal effort. And, you really kind of see this version of Century of Robert Reynolds in this fight where, he throws Red Guardian out the window and that could be the end of him, but he yanks him back in so he can beat on him some more. He's just toying with all of these characters. And now none of the super soldier characters are like super powerful characters. But if you are on that tier of power, why wouldn't you be doing stuff like that? Either you do that or you do what Wanda does to everybody and is like instant kill, instant kill, instant kill. Yeah. And, I think it's kind of one thing that, in past pods, you and I have talked about, like, I want to see that version of World Breaker Hulk, like the one that doesn't, get thrashed by Thanos in 30 seconds. Like, I want to see the version of him that is like just taking everyone out. Now, the challenge, obviously, when you do that is you have to figure out a way that you can sort of corral them or not have them just destroy everybody. And that is kind of the perfect nature of what Robert Reynolds is, because you do have the Void as this, schizophrenic other side of his personality that you can't have one version of him without the other. And in the comics, what they do is they actually make him forget that he is the Century, because that's what gets rid of the Void. There's actually a signal that they put
in the Watchtower.
Reed Richards put on the Watchtower so that everybody in the area doesn't remember who Robert Reynolds actually is. That's how they deal with him, But how they would get him to come out of the Void in the comics is really not that different than what they do here in the movie. Like, you basically have to talk him out of it, because there are characters out there who are strong enough. And if you're going to start to have somebody coming in the Fantastic Four movie like Franklin Richards, and I want to see that, man. I want to see those level of powerful characters because they exist in comics. But unfortunately, you're not going to get a punch and shoot version of how you take them down, because they can't be punched and shoot to death. Like, that just isn't going to happen. So I really, really actually like this depiction of what an OP character is, and that in most cases, the OP characters in comics all have very significant, character flaws is the right word, but they have flaws in their personality that does allow them to kind of be controlled at some level. The Hulk has Banner. Like, that's the control, is you have Banner within him. And that's where World Breaker Hulk goes off the rails, right? Because it's like in Thor Ragnarok, where he was like, normally I feel like we both have one hand on the wheel. And Banner's like, this time it felt like I got, he had both hands on the wheel and I was locked in the trunk. Like, that's how that story goes in the comics as well, where that's how the Hulk takes that, the weakness of what he feels Banner is out of the equation. And that's what they do here with Century when they have the Void as the sort of the opposite side of him. And so when you see that in the post-credit scene where, they're talking about what's going on and Bob's sitting there like eating popcorn, reading a book, and they're like, what are you doing? He's like, I can't do anything because if I'm the Century, then the other guy might show up too.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting in Doomsday how that's balanced out as well. And maybe there will be something with Reed and that and the Watchtower going on. Doom will do something to try to manipulate that, I'm sure, with the Void. So now it adds an interesting nugget to everything. I thought Yelena obviously stole the show in this, but Bucky and Sebastian Stan as himself felt like the biggest star when he came out. And I don't know if it's now because he's coming off the double Oscar nomination or what's going on. But number one, like, he felt like he could be in Mission Impossible. He felt like he could be in John Wick. He felt like he could be the Terminator. And that one scene alone, I think that's one of those Marvel scenes that we'll be talking about for a long time, because just like James Dean, like, he just looked, there's no other way to see. He just looks so cool. He just looks so badass. Like, the way that he came out of there, like, it was like, oh, well, yes,
and you even have like you have Red Guardian and you have U.S. Agent. They're fanboying over the fact that he's there too. Like, they're just as excited at how cool he looks as we are as watchers of the movie.
Yeah.
And I think what this really showed, we talked about this when we watched Brave New World. Like, is Sam Wilson a character that can carry a movie? And I don't know. To me, maybe it really wasn't. Like, he's not Cap. Like, to me, he's just not that version.
Do you think that would have had a worse box office because Harrison Ford wasn't in it? Do you think that the box office helped because it had Harrison Ford?
I think so. I mean, it's a recognizable person. And again, like, I certainly don't think that there's anything negative about what they're doing with the Captain America character. This happened in the comics, but in the comics it wasn't super successful either because he's not Steve Rogers. Like, and you kind of see it in this, right? Like, any sort of version of the super soldier serum, it amplifies everything about who you are as a person. So, do you know what Bucky really was? Like, would Bucky have been the Winter Soldier if there was no Hydra brainwashing to him? You would guess not, because that's why him and Steve were best friends. Like, they were those types of people. He now lives with a very different version of himself because of how much negative stuff that he has done. You have a guy like Robert Reynolds who has all of these challenges, right? Like, somebody who is paranoid schizophrenic, who does have depression issues, who does have a terrible childhood, who has turned to drugs as a coping tool. Like, if you start amplifying all of those things in a person, you're maybe not going to get the best version of a human coming out of that. What you got with Steve Rogers is you found this man who was just a good man. And when you amplified the goodness in him, that's what you get. You get Captain America. And, so do you get that with Sam Wilson? I don't know. We talked about it. We're like, is he enough to carry a movie on his own? And we both said, like, Florence Pugh and Sebastian Stan, these are two actors that can carry a film. And they showed that in this movie. Like, you could have had way more Bucky in this movie, and you could have had way more Yelena, and they were both sort of the primary characters in the movie, and I would have taken way more.
I think maybe it helps because this was Anthony Mackie's, I believe, is the first film Anthony Mackie ever led as well. So people haven't been used to seeing Anthony Mackie as a leading man. Hopefully, as things go on and we have some of these films go forward, they'll get, it'll be, oh yeah, Anthony Mackie is a leading man. We can get that, right? I mean, even if someone like Sam Rockwell, it took forever for him to become a leading man, right? It takes that jump, but we've already seen Sebastian Stan be a leading man and Florence Pugh lead movies like Midsommar, for example, beforehand, or be one of the main, actors in Oppenheimer or Little Women entirely, right? So I think the audience had been gauged to that. Now we say all this, and it still had a lesser box office than Brave New World did this week.
And I think that just comes down to, like, I think there are going to be people who are just cynics about the mental health aspect. They're like, again, this is not my Marvel. I don't want to see this. And this is not a movie that's a big punch and shoot movie. Like there's action in it, but it's not, crazy Avengers action with like, 5 guys taking on 1,000. Like that's not what this movie was ever supposed to be about. But I guess when I look at it is like, again, the movies that I'm comparing it to, that original Guardians, original Doctor Strange, those movies didn't have huge box offices either, but they created, original Captain America, First Avenger, not a great box office. But when you look back on it, that's a really, really freaking good movie.
I think
and
the
there's
issue
a story
too
behind it.
I think the issue for the box office side of things, I don't think for a viewer, you and I are the audience for these films, so we're going to see them no matter what, right? For an outside side of things, I think it's because people, yes, they see Florence Pugh and Sebastian Stan, but they don't know who White Widow is. Winter Soldier they would know by now. He's had his own TV show, but they don't know who U.S. Agent is. They don't know who Ghost is. So I think not having maybe the bigger names, and I do wonder if this week was why they did the new Avengers side of things. My personal thing is, and what I want to talk more about is, I would hope that the word of mouth carried out now, because you've had a week. You don't really go opposed for a little bit here. Obviously, Sinners is still killing it at the box office, and Sinners just passed, I believe, $250 million at the box office. So shouts out to Sinners. But I would wonder, word of mouth is a real thing. And this was never going to be, when we did our box office draft, we were all kind of hesitant to take it because we never thought this would be more than a $600 million movie. None of us foresaw this being a $1 billion movie, but I do think word of mouth can happen. And maybe seeing the new Avengers thing is going to pique people's interest. I don't know. I think there is more to this movie than just saying, oh, it's a new Avengers, and then catching people that way. I would have preferred if Marvel would have kept the Thunderbolt side, because then you get to go in and you get to see the comedic ambience that you have with
about Yelena's soccer team.
The soccer team, but with Bucky and Red Guardian, and you get to see some slow growth in the U.S. Agent character and Ghost, who really, we got her backstory in Ant-Man and the Wasp, but I thought Ghost was really great in this. Taskmaster was done pretty dirty, but at least got a good fight there before what happened with Taskmaster. I would say too, for this, like, it was the first time in a while, like, you and I like Eternals, but I don't think every single character in Eternals got their just due as far as character development and getting to know the characters, because there's so many in there. I would say by the time I got out of this, I feel like every single one of the Thunderbolts, I had time with them. I got to learn new stuff about them. I got to adapt for them, and I got to carry for them. So by the time we go to Doomsday now, I have a lot more input and care for those characters now.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say, like, even when you look at Falcon and Winter Soldier, on Disney Plus, I was not a fan of Wyatt Russell. Like, I didn't really actually think he was even a good actor in the role. And I came out of this movie and I was like, you know what? He's actually killing it in this role. Like, he's doing a really, really good job. And I'll say this, like, you and I think, see No Way Home as it's a good movie, but there's all the nostalgia barriers that everybody seems to cling on to that say, well, this is like, the best post-Endgame film. And, I didn't go to the theater and watch No Way Home again. I am going to go to the theater and watch this movie again. Like, I want to see this again in the theater. Like, I want to see the whole thing. Like, I laughed out loud a lot in this film. Like you said, I learned about these characters. There's a part of me that is like, do I actually like, this Yelena better than I like Scarlett Johansson?
I've seen that go around. I've seen that take go around quite a bit. And I also think Red Guardian, Lego did a Marvel special a year or two ago with Red Guardian. And they absolutely nailed the Red Guardian comedic side of things. Mm-hmm. And we saw it in Black Widow with Red Guardian. And we saw a little bit of it in What If. But man, did Harbor has got to be one of the most, as Red Guardian now, one of the most beloved characters going into, like, when you go into Doomsday and you're hoping for people that potentially don't die in Doomsday and then in Secret Wars. I would bet you that Red Guardian is near the damn top.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of people like, Grace Randolph, she was one of the people out there who kept saying like, I'm hearing that there's a chance that Red Guardian dies in this film. And like, there's points like in that fight with Sentry, like you heard me say it at one point, like, oh my God, he's going to kill Bucky. Like, I'm like, one of these guys is going to get dusted by Sentry here. And like, it was either going to be Bucky or it was going to be Red Guardian. The fact that both of them came out of that alive, I was like, woo-hoo!
If it wasn't for the chairs,
I would have definitely been like, Bucky's dead. Like, we're going to lose Bucky here. He's going to beat Bucky to death with his own arm. Like, that's how terrible this is going to be.
Marvel needs the marketing for this movie. Now you think about it, between the chairs and the change in the name, maybe some stuff we'd maybe want to double think there.
Right. And, they're doing some really cool stuff with the Fantastic Four stuff. Like, like I told you, like they're doing this stuff like Sunday at 7, they have the family dinner and that's, they're posting stuff on the website every week on that, at that time, like new images and new stories and all that sort of stuff. Like they're doing some clever stuff, but you're right. Like, between the chairs, and I guess I get why you want to do that because you're about to start filming Doomsday, and you're like, man, you just want to get ahead of any.
Yeah, but we know the second now to chairs now that My Time to Shine and others have confirmed, right? We're not going to get into that today. Why not just wait and do it for the second side of chairs, right? You didn't need to, if those side of chairs announce it. Maybe in their minds, it's like we want to get people excited that these characters are going to be involved in Doomsday.
They're going to make it. You can go and see the film. They're going to make it.
And then, when they announced all the members of the new Avengers, Thunderbolts, whatever, and you didn't see Taskmaster there, you're like, well, that's pretty obvious. She's pretty much Slipknot then. Not
only did you not show up in a lot of the marketing and promo ads, but you're the only one not on a chair. Something tells me you may not make it.
What do you think about the Suicide Squad comparisons?
Is that
lazy? Is that lazy?
It is a little lazy. I mean, I guess to a certain extent, if you look at what they were in the comics, I think maybe that's, there's a comparison of them there.
Well, they're really the Dark Avengers, right?
Probably more so. I mean, this team was never the Thunderbolts.
No, this is the Dark Avengers.
And the one character that, if you had Taskmaster in there because you were like, we just have to try to balance things out. One of the characters who is a member of the Thunderbolts that I would have loved in this movie, because I think Daniel Bruhl would have killed it, is if he would have had Zemo in this. If you put Zemo in this movie, that would have been a sick character to have as part of that group and that team. And, to see him surrounded by, all these versions of super soldiers that are like the bane of his existence, and to see that maybe Steve Rogers isn't the only version of a super soldier that can be a good person. And, maybe that's something that you could have helped Zemo change his mind. Maybe, you obviously saw it on Andor, maybe you just can't get all the characters in the film that you really want to have, but man, Daniel Bruhl as Zemo in this film would have been, and then you would have had a third anchor character. Like you would have had Sebastian Stan, Daniel Bruhl, and Florence Pugh. And I mean, this is a pretty serious Oscar-worthy acting group, running a B-list list of characters in a Marvel movie. And, if you want to start creating, the sensation that was phase 1, 2, and 3 of the MCU, this movie to me is like saying, hey, maybe there is a path forward, because this is the type of movie that I want. I don't want more No Way Home. I don't want that. When they're talking about, what's the next Spider-Man 4 going to be like? And it's like, well, we're going to do multiverse, and it's going to be like him fighting aliens. And I don't want to see that. I want to see Spider-Man fight Kingpin and Green Goblin and ground level characters, because that's who Spidey is. I don't need to see, and I don't need to see Toby and Andrew back. Like, if you want to do Toby and Andrew movies, fill your boots, do those movies. I'll go and see that movie too. But that doesn't need to be part of Spider-Man to make a good Spider-Man movie.
I think some people missed what hit with Endgame, right? The point of Endgame that hit was an amalgamation of over a decade of filmmaking come together. So it was special. When you do it all the time, right? It's like, very basic analogy right here for you. You like pizza, but you're not going to have pizza every single day because then it's not going to feel so special anymore when you have pizza. But when you had it in Endgame and
pizza might
portals,
be the one thing that does use
maybe
every time.
but and even with No Way Home, which you and I again are lower on, but watching it at home and then you see Garfield and Toby come out and the weird pause for the audience that you couldn't even just edit it for the home version a little bit,
right?
To put it down a little bit. But
you did that solely so there would be a spot for a cheer in the theater. And I get the reason that you did that is because you had that moment in Endgame where Cap picks up the hammer and everybody is like, woo! My entire theater cheered out loud in that moment. And you want to have those things. But man, if that's what you're building your movie around, is to try to create one of those moments, Endgame built it up to, so he could say Avengers Assemble. He could pick up the hammer. Like, you could see those moments happen where you're like, yeah, I got 10 years of time invested in this. That's why this matters.
You got to bring up
Andrew and Toby come out is like, yeah, okay, so there's more versions of Spider-Man out there. Super.
You bring up the organic moments, right? And I see, Bucky on the motorcycle. When we get a montage of Marvel stuff, I think that will always be there now. That montage there of Bucky on the motorcycle, the Guardians and Guardians 3 opening that gateway and facing all of Evo's creations right there, right in the last final fight as the Guardians. I think that was a built, well earned fight for the Guardians to have in their final farewell. Just you have those cameos, you're just getting the pop to get the pop in wrestling terms right there. And I felt in this earned a lot of those moments that really paid off. I'll remember the elevator scene, right? That was and other scenes in here that are going to, and I will say, as I'm rambling a little bit here because we're coming to the end, but I think the one thing this film did to me is the end credit scene actually mattered again, because the one thing I miss on it, especially as a podcaster, right, is theories. Theories is what drives the MCU. Devin and I have talked about this forever, right? We walk out of this film and it's like, well, where are we going? Like, I know the MCU has the big thing that says Doomsday is coming and Secret Invasion's coming, or what Secret War is coming. But with the past one, we knew Thanos was coming, right? And so we'd come on the pod, or I'd do shows with you. It was like, well, how did we get here to here? Because the end credit scenes this time was a word jumble. So we didn't really know, like, the Pit Patrol leads to here, but then the incursions, which Charlize Theron lead here, but Hercules is over here. And for the first time,
and you went years with none of it paying off. Like,
exactly,
the whole idea of what the end credits is supposed to be is it's supposed to give you like, this is the direction that we're going. And if we keep giving you end credit scenes just for the sake of end credit scenes, but there's no payoff, you know what it tells me? They don't know where it's going either. And that's why this version of the multiverse is directionless, because they didn't know where it was going either. But now you see this and you're like, aha, this was it was an end credit scene that was done by the Russos, who were doing Doomsday, who are part of Fantastic Four. And they're like, look, man, we are showing you, we actually know where the bus is going now. There are two hands driving the bus and we know where we're going. Because when you start to show Hercules and you're like, I don't know, when did that happen? 5 years ago? Not seen Hercules since. You saw the end of Shang-Chi and you're talking to Hulk and Captain Marvel about the 10 rings. Haven't seen where any of that's going. All this stuff that keeps coming up in these in these end credit scenes. This one, I'm like, this is very much like, what was it? The one that they did at the end of Winter Soldier, where they showed Bucky and them had Bucky. They had Bucky on the all locked down in the big anvil. Yeah. And that wound up being a scene from one of the next movies. Like, I would bet money this is going to be a scene from another movie. That's what I want out of my end credit scene. Because you're right. Because then we can get on our podcast and we can be like, this is cool because I can see where this is going. We can talk about who's on the ship. Is it just the Fantastic Four? Is it just Doctor Doom? Is it a combination of the two? Is it Franklin Richards as a baby flying a spaceship because he's all powerful? Is it Shia LaBeouf, Silver Surfer, coming to try to warn us that, hey, you better watch out because Galactus is coming? Like, it could be all of these different cool things, but we know something is going to happen. So I can be excited about that.
And also, what else is going on in space, right? Because something crazy has been going on in space. Who are the new Avengers, which we're going to make our guesses here in a second here. There's all these different things, like the lawsuit. Was what led to the fallout between Bucky and Sam, right? Like, there's all these different things that you can theorize now going into Doomsday, and even more so going into Fantastic Four, right? Because now you're going to go into Fantastic Four and be like, okay, so does Galactus eat the world? Or do they make the sacrifice that they have to leave to this world? Or what happens? So now it gets your mind racking and excited about going into Fantastic Four, which is what you're supposed to do. You set a template to get you excited about. It doesn't always have to connect, but now they've connected the next film, which is going to be the final film before we get into Doomsday. The wild thing of all of this is that in, I think, 40 days, we're having Ironheart come out and there's been no marketing.
Right. And I mean, I think we talked about this, the New York Times article that just came out that talked about, what was happening under Bob Chapek. And
he wanted a paycheck.
He wanted all the paychecks, and how they forced Marvel into doing so much content. They needed to put stuff on Disney Plus. They needed to have, and the ideas of these guys who were like spending weeks in the Marvel offices trying to hunt down Kevin Feige to say, hey, can you look at this and tell us if you think it's good? And then he would be like, no, change this, but you have a week to do it. And you wonder why some of your CGI doesn't look great and all that sort of stuff. Well, because the guy who is supposed to be steering this is not, again, he doesn't have both hands on the wheel driving the bus. And they've really, really talked about this next version, which I think for me especially is going to be near and dear to my heart because it's going to be about mutants. It's going to be about the X-Men. I want them to do this well. Like, I want to see a version of Dark Phoenix that is as amazing as it was in the comics, but you have to get us there. I want to see X-Men versus Avengers. I want to see all of that. I want to see, Mr. Sinister. I want to see these great X-Men characters that, we've gotten a chance to see in X-Men 87 that are part and parcel of what made those comics great. And I don't want to see a Dark Phoenix version that I'm like, so she turns into a bad version of it, but this is the only thing that relates to what it was in the comics. Please don't do that again.
To get near the end here, where do you think that what the new Avengers are? I think we can kind of clarify a few that we think. I would assume that kind of meeting room that we had there with Hulk, with Wong, with Captain Marvel, and Shang-Chi. I think we can form those four, correct?
Yep, I would think so.
Okay. She-Hulk?
I think so. I think there has to be some more payoff. Tatiana Maslany was so good in that. Like, you and I both really like that. And again, it was really true to the comics. So I really like that. It was, most people are like, oh, wasn't that great of a story? I think it actually was. Miss Marvel, I want to see her. I want to see Miss Marvel in this.
She's Young Avengers though, because she's in the West Coast right now. So
could be.
Her and Kate Bishop missed the void.
Right? Thank God.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if you saw on the Midnight Boys, they were laughing because they were like, man, if you live in New York during this time and you've had, the Chitauri invasion, you've had all this stuff with Punisher and Daredevil and Strange, and now you've had the Void come through, man, why are you not moving? Like, that should be the cheapest rent in America is Manhattan, because you're like, man, terrible shit is going to happen to you if you live here.
Kingpin is going to have to do one hell of a tourism video.
Right? Like, what are you going to say? Hey, come to New York. See all your worst nightmares come to life. Like,
and not to mention, too, Kingpin has locked down the city, too. So you have a curfew and all this bad shit's happening.
Yeah, you have to be inside at 8 o'clock. And don't worry, somehow somebody is going to come and manipulate your mind to show you your worst fears of your entire life. Come to New York.
Anyone else that we're missing out from this Avengers team that you think of?
I mean, we talked about like Star-Lord. I mean, he's here. Where is Thor in all of this? Asgard is obviously on Earth now, but is he off gallivanting around?
I don't think Spidey's on it.
I don't think so either. Like, I think you'll get Spidey come Secret Wars, but I don't think you're going to see him here in Doomsday. The one part that I wonder is there going to be enough conflict between Bucky's version and Sam's version? They're going to does Doom pit them against one another? Is that fight the thing that brings everybody together? That maybe in all of that, somebody like Bucky gets killed, and somebody important that is like, man, we can't do this to one another. Like, we have a bigger thing to fight against, and we can't be doing this.
Yeah, I think we can definitely see that.
But again, this is the fun part of a good end credit scene that is actually going to take place in another movie.
And he's getting sued. Did he get a good lawyer?
Right?
Did he get a really good lawyer?
Right? Is it Mr. Murdoch? Is he going to come up and step up to the plate for him, or I guess it could be She-Hulk?
It could be She-Hulk as well. Yeah, I mean, if one could be represented by She-Hulk, one could be represented by Matt Murdock. That'd be fun.
I mean, the two of them are going to have sex in between days in court. So hey, you get that extra layer of things in the MCU.
Frank Castle, I believe, is allowed in the movies, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we might see Punisher. We don't know. Moon Knight could be an Avenger, maybe. I don't know. I don't think so.
I mean, I think all these characters show up in Secret Wars. I think when they're creating these Avengers teams, I don't think those guys are going to be a part of that. And again, the challenge is you have characters like Frank,
Ant-Man. Ant-Man will be in the Avengers.
Yeah, but I mean, Frank, Yelena, like, these are still just regular people. Like,
yeah, I know.
If you're going to have Thor and Hulk and Sentry and Wanda and all these characters in it, I don't know what Frank's going to do in this sort of fight. Like, he can be as pissed off and angry and hurt as he wants. Guys like, you bring Wolverine into this, like a guy who can't be killed. Like, what's he going to do to Daredevil? Like, in the comics, he peels Daredevil's skin off. Like, like there's very terrible things that can happen when the underpowered fight the overpowered.
Before we get out of here, any last thoughts you want to get on really quick?
No, man. Like I said, this was, I think, for the, is Marvel back? I don't know if I want to make that type of comment, but this is the MCU that, I think all of us, this is what built us up to Infinity War and Endgame, is films like this. Because I came out of this movie, I care about all these characters, and maybe before I didn't really care about them all. Like, that was the idea of the original Avengers. Were people going to care about Captain America, Iron Man? Like, these weren't this wasn't Spider-Man. This wasn't Logan. This wasn't the A-list version of characters in the Marvel pantheon of comic book characters. But because they did such a good job of building them up, you cared about those characters. Like, when you see what happens with Black Widow and, her and Clint, like, this was a meaningful sacrifice because of who those two characters were to each other. You can go back to the Hawkeye show when Yelena is there talking to Clint, and Clint does the whistle to her, and you're like, there it is. This shows how important these characters were to one another, and that's why I love them. Like, Clint should have been, he's just a regular dude who's got really good aim. Like, I don't know if that makes you Avengers worthy, but him and Black Widow were so good together, and they'd been through so much that you cared about those characters. Well, I come out of Thunderbolts and I'm like, man, I love Red Guardian. I'm back on board with Bucky. I'm in love with Yelena. Like, Ghost, I get, like, the 2 times that she comes back where everybody's like, oh my God, she's left us here again. And then she rolls in and you can see U.S. agent is like, you didn't leave us again. Cool. But I mean, like, you're building up that internal, dialogue of value for all these other characters. And that's what makes us care about them as well, which, like, when you saw that scene, Red Guardian, he stopped that big place of concrete from crushing that kid. And then the Void snaps her away. And it's like, this is terrible. Like, this is not how these situations are supposed to go.
I want to know what happened to Chris Brower, though. This is my last question before we go. So he gets voided in the helicopter. So when he gets unvoided, is he in the sky? Does he die? Does he in the street? Like, that's what I need to, like, we've had this question about the, you know, the snap with people like that as well, right? But so Chris Brower, you know, people would know him from True Blood or The Wire. So
I hope everybody just comes down in a nice, safe place. They've been in a very terrible environment for a while. I mean, God only knows, like, when you're in the void, how much actual time has gone by in the real world? Like, is it the same amount of time? Were you in there for years? Like, when did these people come back out? How long was New York overwhelmed by the void? You know, there's definitely some questions there, but man, I'll tell you from just the visual and the storytelling perspective, and that was a terrible, terrible place.
Not a terrible movie. Out of 10, what do you give it?
8 out of 10, solid 8.
I'm giving it 8.5. Quite enjoyed it. Andy and I will be back with more shows. As you saw from our social media post, having some issues with some audio stuff, but we'll be up and figuring that out ASAP. You can catch everything still on YouTube. Good to see Andy Kenyar back. And until next time, folks, cheers and enjoy the day, people.